Yeah, look, I think that's the key question. I guess the headline to answer that question is house them. I, having worked with them only in one facility, which was Howlett's Wild Animal Park in the UK, they can be displayed quite well. They can also display terribly, and unfortunately, with zoos, historically, that's what we're looking at, right? We're looking at can your guests see this animal? Is it going to be doing something? And if so, great. However, as we move forward, I don't think zoos have that as much of a priority. And having grown up as a young kid, and having Howlett's as my local zoo, and then being lucky enough to go work there, I remember people saying, my mum included, you may not see the animals because the enclosures were pretty well planted and set pretty far back because their ethos was a little different. And I think other zoos are finding that kind of compromise. So I'd certainly be encouraging of zoos to display them more, and have creative ways to do that, I guess. I mean, look at, some of the camera trap footage from Paradise Wildlife Park, now had a name change, which you're going to remind me of now, Johnny.
It's Hertfordshire Zoo now, yeah.
That's it. And I'm very glad to hear zoo come back into names. We should take ownership of that. But look at their footage of the snow leopards, that they post on Facebook of them cuddling up of an evening. It goes real popular. There's no reason why you can't have those cameras running at your visitor, your guest experience area. If they can't see the cat, is there an opportunity for them to be able to see them in a non-invasive way, like a live stream?
In this episode, you will discover the superpowers and abilities of our featured species, the clouded leopard. We'll be discussing the threats from the villainous extinction and putting the spotlight on our allies in conservation, whilst deep diving into our hero's origin story. Tune in, learn and be inspired as to how you, the listener, are a very important element to the conservation machine. Welcome to the Conservationists Assemble, a podcast helping animal lovers, zoo enthusiasts and the hard-working everyday heroes fighting extinction gain further insight into the lives of our animal friends around the world. Each week we discuss the inner workings of the conservation efforts taking place to ensure their survival, including any gaps where more vital work is necessary and what you can do at home to provide assistance. The biodiversity crisis is the single biggest threat to our planet. Will you join the fight? Greetings friends, it's your friendly neighbourhood Captain Conservation here, aka Johnny Bloxham. This week I had the honour of joining forces with another wildlife warrior. After pointing my conservation signal into the skies, I am thrilled that this hero answered the call to join the fight. Now over to you, wildlife hero, time to take the spotlight.
My name is Dan. I'm a zookeeper working in Australia, but from the UK originally, where I did quite a bit of work with clouded leopards. So looking forward to talking about them.
Dan, it's an honour to be teaming up with you today. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, Johnny. How are you?
I'm glad to hear. Yeah, I'm good too. Thank you. I'm thrilled that you're here. I'm looking forward to this episode. So to prepare us for the battleground that is clouded leopard conservation, firstly, could you just tell us a little bit about clouded leopards, please?
Yeah, sure. So clouded leopards are a real cryptic species. Part of the reason why I find them so fascinating, and most people do, is how little we truly know about them. They are found in Southeast Asia, traditionally thought of in a sort of a rainforest habitat. And yeah, up until not too long ago, we probably thought there was only one species of clouded leopard around, but the evidence shows that there are actually now two. So you kind of have a mainland and island species, Neofelis nebulosa and then Diardi. So you get them all through Southeast Asia and into Sumatra and Borneo as well. Most of what we know about them, to be honest, comes from sort of zoo data. So we can make a lot of assumptions about them, but a lot of what we truly know is guesswork. Most species, we know what they eat. Clouded leopards, I can't truthfully say. Even as recently as when I started my career in sort of 2015, we thought that primates were probably quite a large part of their diet. They've been seen taking various primates and eating at height in trees. But actually, more recent studies indicate things like pigs and hog badgers and rodents are more likely common prey species. There are lots of reports about domestic animals being taken or domesticated sort of farmyard species being taken, but chances are that's just more likely to be reported because it obviously affects someone individually if it takes their goat or something. But in terms of the really cool things, the main thing people think about with clouded leopards is how they look. They're a very striking animal with these beautiful cloud-like patterns on them, and their teeth. Despite being, between 10 to 12 kilos for a female and maybe sort of 15 to 18 kilos on average for a male, their canines are actually the same size as tiger species. So you're looking at kind of a couple of inches in size there, which is, pretty considerable. And with cats, as a general rule, unless you're kind of above that 40 kilo mark as an adult, you're not really going to be able to take down prey that's much larger than yourself, unless you have a bit of a secret weapon. And clouded leopards have that in their teeth and their canines. Another example would be cheetah, who obviously have the pace. And also they have this beautiful long tail. Clouded leopards and snow leopards, comparative to size, have the longest tails of any cat species. Obviously, both of them use that to balance in different ways. Snow leopards at general height and rocky areas. Clouded leopards very adept at climbing trees. One of only a couple of species of cat that can rotate their ankles fully, which means they can basically climb straight up a tree, turn around and come straight back down. So, yeah, they're pretty unique. But honestly, all those cool things I listed, I think the coolest thing is how little we know. Mystery is kind of always something that we find exciting, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems to be that there's a lot of research prevailing now on clouded leopards in situ, which is only a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. For example, as I say, when I started my career, which is 9 years ago, I could say in public talks that we have very little, if any, known footage of them taken on a camera, video footage taken on a camera by a person. Whereas now that's changing a lot. I mean, camera traps, yes. The accessibility of cameras, everyone's got one in their pocket. But that's a short period of time to start even getting simple data like footage. There is more of a push, particularly with the start of the Clouded Leopard Working Group, for this research to be done, and crucially to be done by people in situ as well, not by researchers flying in and flying out. This is done by people who are boots on the ground, born in that country, indigenous people to those lands, in quite tough terrain to get that research and, try and get that bigger understanding, because the mystery is exciting, but it's also a really easy way for that species to be discredited when it comes to things like land protection, because if they haven't been cited, then it's much easier for organisations to discredit them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose now is we've talked about land protection. It's a good opportunity to introduce the villain of the story, or the threats to the clouded leopard. So yeah, could you outline what we do know about why we're talking about clouded leopards today?
Yeah, it's really quite complex in some respects, but for anybody with any idea about conservation or the threats facing the natural world, it's pretty straightforward. They live in Southeast Asia. Habitat destruction is rife. Non-sustainable palm oil plantation is rife. And this isn't a species which is going to adapt particularly well. Most carnivores are persecuted. most carnivores are misunderstood. Certainly living in Australia, it's very obvious. Me and Johnny met in the UK and both worked in the UK, where we have very little carnivores left because of persecution, of one of the reasons. So numbers is a hard thing. When I talk about not knowing, we don't know how they come together to breed. We don't truly know what they, how long they live, for example, in the wild. So numbers is hard. The best research I've found is that the Neofelis nebulosa, the mainland species, is kind of between 3,500 and 5,500 animals remaining. The Diardi on the islands, sort of 4,000-ish, both listed as vulnerable on IUCN. But a really interesting study in Laos showed that clouded leopards, or nebulosa clouded leopard, has a 90% chance of a continued decrease based on all the scientific research. So we're looking at an animal that is not only in trouble, but it's very firmly staying in trouble. And as I say, the key reason is the habitat destruction. Kind of a side issue, but I do believe that we should stop using the phrase habitat loss, because we haven't lost it. We have consciously destroyed it. It's not missing like a set of old keys. We know what's happened to it. So let's, language is so important in conservation and zoos, and I guess in podcasting. But some other interesting threats that we kind of know of, but in preparing for this episode, I did a bit more research. The pet trade is a big one. These are animals that can be hand-reared and are often hand-reared, and to some extent will live around people. Just bearing in mind they have the size canine teeth of a tiger. Probably wouldn't recommend it. But the unethical and illegal pet trade is a big thing. But another thing is countries like Laos have made a conscious effort to try and remove all of their tiger numbers to try and increase safety. So these guys get caught up in that. The snares and things that have been laid for several decades now to remove tigers are still destroying wildlife left, right, and centre. So it's another issue. They're kind of really going to struggle because their habitat is being destroyed around them, and they're persecuted either as as something people don't want to have around them because they have livestock, or because they're just part of the bycatch, as it were, for tigers, but also because people want them, unfortunately, whether that's their skin or whether that's as a pet. So it's a really, really tough place for them to be. They're not too far from, orangutan threats. They're in that kind of realm, along with a lot of our Southeast Asian animal friends, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you for outlining those points there, Dan. I've just got a couple of things that I'd like to add on to that. So when we're talking about habitat destruction, I suppose it's beneficial to give you, the listeners, an idea of the scale of the habitat available to clouded leopards for this example, then looking at actually, well, how much of that habitat is protected, and I suppose then also considering island species are at a lot greater risk of extinction than say mainland species. So it's interesting when you've got that comparison in this species, in the sense that you've got two species. One's a mainland species, one is an island species. So yeah, firstly, if you look at the island of Sumatra, for example, pull that up on Google Maps, key or suitable clouded leopard habitat, only maybe 13% of Sumatra is suitable clouded leopard habitat, and less than half, for about 40% of that 13% is protected. And then jump into Borneo, about 34% of the habitat on Borneo is suitable for clouded leopards, but only 15% of that is protected. And that does make way for developments to come along and really, ramp up that pressure even more than it already is. And so, yeah, I know it's always hard for us to sit here as Westerners to, say, oh, well, you shouldn't be doing these developments, because they absolutely should be. They've got a right to live and a right to develop. Yes, there's a few projects that are happening that maybe, while they're still going ahead, just need to take species into consideration. And I'm sure that, they're already being discussed, but things like wildlife corridors and making it wildlife friendly at the same time. So yeah, you're talking about buildings of highways and roads around these islands and among islands, but also that they're about to build a new Indonesian capital city out in Borneo, which could have real detrimental effects on the habitat available to, so not just clouded leopards, but a lot of species on the island.
Yeah, that's it. The impact is pretty sad, and I guess your points there bring up a couple of interesting things. The first one is, it is a bit of a political hot potato whenever you bring up these kind of issues within countries that maybe don't have as many resources as the countries that we're lucky enough to live in. So they're looking for some of those shorter term gains, and rightly so. If you're a nation that has the ability to extract money from resources, then why shouldn't you, from a human perspective? But to balance the ecosystem, it's only going to lead to destruction. And also, I'm sitting in Australia, you're sitting in the UK. Both of those countries know better and still do the same thing. Yeah. And the other thing about toll roads and things, I haven't actually read it yet, but I've just picked up a new book called A Clouded Leopard in the Middle of the Road by Darryl Jones, which kind of talks about road ecology and the unknown effects of road ecology, and sort of the reason for the title is a chance sighting of a clouded leopard, which is obviously a pretty rare treat for anybody, but it was on a road. And that paradox of being able to see this beautiful kind of unknown, mysterious cat, but the backdrop of that is concrete road. And actually just went to the Australian Society of Zookeeping conference at Perth, and there was a talk from a lady doing a lot of work with orangutan organisations about how orangutans are learning that they can beg at the side of roads as their habitat is destroyed behind them. You're very unlikely to find a clouded leopard doing that, but certainly if roads become a source of food as a result of roadkill, not only are roads then stripping through habitats and splitting them up, but they're becoming an easy site for animals to get hit, as certainly we see over here with macropod species, kangaroos, wallabies, carnivorous birds. It's a real problem. Tasmanian devils, their plight on the roads is crazy. And I guess, Johnny, it's like we're not learning the lessons from conservation issues of the past or that are currently happening in other countries. And the clouded leopard is almost certainly, as that study shows, going to suffer from that.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's at that that do or die time, and how many times do we have to keep saying these things before those actionable changes happen? And there's plenty of examples of how to make those actionable changes. You see it with wildlife corridors. When new roads are being built, you see pictures all the time. How do we get those factored in to not saying that we shouldn't be that they shouldn't be building these roads, like you say, because they absolutely have the right to. But yeah, how can we put animals on the same level as humans when we're considering these things?
Yeah, it's tough, man. It's tough because it's a privilege. It's no, not a privilege. It's I guess it's a privilege. It's kind of a luxury, right? Conservation is a bit of a luxury. Look at COVID. There was lots of indirect conservation by the fact that many wild spaces were pretty untouched. But there's also lots of negatives because budgets were cut and money, the first thing people do is cancel their charitable direct debits during tough times. And as a analogy of what maybe Sumatra is doing with its natural resources as an example, if you lose your job or you're furloughed, you're going to tighten the purse strings and try and look to make money elsewhere. It's seen as that luxury when it really shouldn't. And the work of people like in the UK, for example, Tony Juniper, who advises Parliament on the economic value of land mass versus development. Maybe we need to look at those things. Maybe we need to look at actions which do link to some of the things you've referenced, like wildlife corridors. But I just don't know when we get to that point, especially for a species which, the basics of its ecology are so unknown.
Yeah, definitely lots of work left to do. And my other point on going back to some of the other threats is you talk about clouded leopards as bycatch for tigers wanting to be removed in Laos. And what, again, not knowing much about clouded leopards, but we see this impact of we should just make it aware that if clouded leopards do go, especially these island ones, we can probably assume that they are the apex predator. We need to think about how the removal of this apex predator through the means of extinction, if that's the route that they're going down, would impact or have a negative impact on the ecosystem and the environment. It's easy to assume that there would be an abundance of prey items, specifically, maybe herbivorous animals, which, in turn, left unchecked, could have a detrimental effect on the landscape through their diet. But what maybe, again, like I said, we mentioned earlier, we don't really know much about the wild diet of the clouded leopard. What if then there's an increase in mesopredators, smaller carnivores than the clouded leopard, because they're not getting predated upon, but not necessarily enough prey items for those mesopredators?
Yeah, the best example that, hopefully a lot of people that are listening would know, but if they don't, the Yellowstone wolf example is just the ultimate apex predator example, the ultimate conservation example of removal of the apex predator in the wolf pack of Yellowstone to keep the guests and visitors to the park safe, despite the fact, I'm pretty sure that in human history there's never been a recorded attack by a wolf, a healthy wolf, in the wild on a human. And then, having to reintroduce them to help balance the ecosystem once the deer had overgrazed all the plant life and the water quality had started to suffer, and the knock-on effect had been huge. And for clouded leopards, it would be no different. The biggest things for them in an ecosystem, outside of keeping certain species in check, is seed dispersal. That's one of their biggest pros, especially living in a rainforest. You need these kind of key species to disperse seeds, whether that would be birds in a lot of places. But the clouded leopard, by eating seed-eating animals and then passing those seeds through and dispersing them, is helping to keep the rainforest alive and to grow it. And then being what we call a range predator. So from what we can tell from what we've seen and their natural physiology, these animals are going to be able to hunt a real wide range of things: birds, primates, things much larger than themselves, things that can do many different things. These guys can climb like a primate. When we put together enclosures for them, I basically kind of have a peek over at what a gibbon's enclosure looks like and go from there, because these guys can climb so well. So by being a range predator, they're able to keep lots of different species in check versus a more specialized, large carnivore, for example, which may only have 2 or 3 species that it really mainly predates, and those species may be, for example, all deer species or all antelope species. So by doing that, they're playing a vital role. And part of the mystery is we truthfully don't know, because we don't know lots of stuff. We don't know what their impact would be on the ecosystem. We can make some very firm assumptions, but it could be even more great. It's unlikely to be less than what we're stating. It's highly likely to be even greater, to be honest.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly that we shouldn't need a reason to keep clouded leopards around, but having that information to hand about their role in the ecosystem and what they can do for the planet should be enough of a reason for actionable change to happen.
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty, so people like them.
yeah, that does it.
And that's conservation, right? Like, it's hard to get people excited about bugs, but you do need a bit of a backup reason as well. There are a lot of species out there that get a lot of attention, and people sort of discredit them because maybe they don't feel like they have a great role to play. But truthfully, most species, apart from humans, have a really, really important role for other animals. And yeah, cuteness alone isn't gonna save them, unfortunately.
So yeah, Dan, thank you for outlining the threats and the issues to clouded leopards and that they're facing. We're now going to shine the spotlight on the allies and the people who are resisting extinction for clouded leopards. So could you just give us a background of the role of zoos in conserving cloudies?
Yeah, for sure. So in this section, I just wanted to kind of make sure that I gave a kind of credit to Graham Law, who there's many people who've been influential in clouded leopards in zoos. But for me, he was probably one of the most exciting zoo professionals I came across, and spoke at the Chester conference so well about enrichment. But whilst working up in Glasgow, he did a lot of work about introductions of clouded leopards and pre-camera traps and pre-technology. So I think Graham Law, in sort of from the 80s onwards, is one of the most, if not the most influential person for ex situ management of clouded leopards, especially when it comes to breeding. But yeah, look, there are zoo stud books for clouded leopards globally. We know of the EASA program, the North American program, SSP, AZA. The Indian Central Zoo Authority has a program. There is an international stud book, which I believe is managed out of North America. So zoos have always had a fascination with exhibiting these animals. I should also mention that there's, of course, the Felid tag, both in Europe and in North America, which do work and specialize in this, and that will help, veterinary considerations and all those kinds of things, and tie the specialists together. But yeah, zoos have always kind of wanted to exhibit them. There are records going back a long time of clouded leopards being exhibited. There are records of them in private hands for at least several decades. But it's always been more of a fascination than true conservation work historically. And I think that is starting to change, but I think there's still an element of it because they are so striking, are so underrepresented. But yeah, to answer your direct role of what zoos have done historically, it's basically been exhibit them and try and breed. But that has truly been just several organisations rather than like a global effort.
So then, moving forward, what more, or what do zoos need to be doing to really, drive home the conservation efforts of clouded leopards in ex situ organisations?
Yeah, look, I think that's the key question. I guess the headline to answer that question is house them. Having worked with them only in one facility, which was Howlett's Wild Animal Park in the UK, they can be displayed quite well. they can also display terribly. And unfortunately, with zoos, historically, that's what we're looking at, right? We're looking at, can your guests see this animal? Is it going to be doing something? And if so, great. However, as we move forward, I don't think zoos have that as much of a priority. And having grown up as a young kid, and having Howlett's as my local zoo, and then being lucky enough to go work there, I remember people saying, my mum included, you may not see the animals because the enclosures were pretty well planted and set pretty far back because their ethos was a little different. And I think other zoos are finding that kind of compromise. So I'd certainly be encouraging of zoos to display them more, and have creative ways to do that, I guess. I mean, look at, some of the camera trap footage from Paradise Wildlife Park, now had a name change, which you're going to remind me of now, Johnny.
It's Hertfordshire Zoo now, yeah.
That's it. And I'm very glad to hear zoo come back into names. We should take ownership of that. But look at their footage of the snow leopards, that they post on Facebook of them cuddling up of an evening. It goes real popular. There's no reason why you can't have those cameras running at your visitor, your guest experience area. If they can't see the cat, is there an opportunity for them to be able to see them in a non-invasive way, like a live stream? The other thing that I'm really pleased to see zoos doing is the Clouded Leopard kind of workshops that have come up. So my good friend Lauren Amos hosted what I believe was probably the first one, or at least the first one for a while, not long ago, at Howlett's, and the next one's going to be held in Renan, which is coming up. So if anyone in Europe is looking at attending one of those, please look that up. Having a few more partnerships. So myself and Lauren in 2018 set up International Clouded Leopard Day. Our intention was to kind of grow, interest in them. We aren't we don't raise funds necessarily, and we do encourage zoos to do so, or other organisations to do so, especially for the Clouded Leopard Working Group, which has since been set up, and Project Neofelis. Those two organisations, those latter ones, Clouded Leopard Working Group and Project Neofelis, are definitely ones to follow and donate to if you can, and as well as giving a plug to my own awareness day of International Clouded Leopard Day. We have Facebook and Instagram for people to follow. But yeah, we just need more spoken about them, and that was the intention with our day, which happens on the 4th of August each year. We need more representation in zoos, whether that is directly with having them displayed or just some partnerships. We've probably all been to zoos where, let's say, an orangutan environment is set up, and they probably have signage which links to some other species which maybe aren't there, and vice versa. So yeah, I think that's the key. I think zoos need to do a little more to represent this species and its home range, even if it is reference to them, but ideally it's housing of them. For a species as well known as it is, speaking from a continent here, which is very close to their home range, much closer than where you're sitting now, Johnny, in the UK, and closer than where the US is. We have one institution that houses them, which is the Wildcat Conservation Centre, just outside of Sydney. They are pretty well represented in some of the larger zoos in situ, so the Asian facilities, Southeast Asian facilities, which is great to see, places like Batu Secret Zoo. And they're really well represented in North America and in Europe. Not in huge numbers. Most facilities have one or two individuals, and globally we have about 250 animals housed. But for the most part, you're looking at places like Nashville, and the one I can never pronounce, which I believe is Tanganyika, who have over 30 at the moment. So it's a tough one. They're hard to exhibit, and I appreciate that from a guest perspective and from a director's perspective. But we were kind of talking before, Johnny, before we started recording, about maybe they need to trend in the same way as you raised that sloths sort of have, to maybe garner some public interest. But look, mate, having worked with them from 2015 to 2020, even just things as simple as people coming to the zoo and having no idea what they were in 2015, and then more people even just being aware of what they are in 2020 was a win. And kind of to throw back to one of your previous points on threats, people having more of an understanding of what palm oil is and the negatives of it is important, but also the positives of it. I think it's important that we don't just say, let's get rid of palm oil. Palm oil is really, really high yield, creates lots of good jobs in areas where jobs are required. It just needs to be grown sustainably. And currently, we're not really doing that. If you look at some of the work that an organisation like Chester Zoo has done in the UK to push local businesses into being responsible palm oil only, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, no, absolutely, very valid point. I suppose just going back to those animals that trend, the other animal that we've really seen great awareness of now is the red panda, and one of my big passions is, you could come across the most non-animal person, and even they would have some semblance of what is going on with rhinos in the wild, because then it makes our job as conservationists so much easier. So raising the profile of every species to that of the rhino would put us in a lot better position. And that's obviously easier said than done, like say for invertebrates and your lower vertebrates, certainly hard to garner that support. But yeah, I think that's definitely the direction we need to be heading in.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. Red panda is such a popular species, but I dare say that most guests aren't leaving with a greater understanding of the reality of life for a red panda. Is that fair? Or they're just leaving thinking it's cute, right, and having a picture?
Yeah, I think they for the most part, they just get, they know that they are a cute animal. Yeah,
It's kind of, I think your rhino point is perfect. Having worked with tigers in zoos, they're cool, right? At its core, they're very cool. They're quite scary, and they're pretty, and they look a bit like the cat you have at home in the way they sort of maybe lay down and stuff. So people love them. Not that long ago, people didn't really love them. They were sort of considered a pest. There's photos of the British royal family standing over many, many bodies of tigers, I believe, in India, because they were being sort of exterminated. And I always look back at sort of times, unfortunately still happens in some places, but if we look at the UK, there were times when you could probably have a picture taken with a tiger cub in a zoo as a pretty normal process. And I reckon it's part of the story of people learning that tigers are good and we like them, and changing their narrative. And with a lot of species, we're still at that point. And I know that me and you both very passionate about zoos and how they're a force for good, but also in a healthy way can probably be some of their biggest critics for what we can improve on. I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think either of us come at it from a perspective of being critical, but more of a kind of demand that we do more.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly an aim of this podcast is to, highlight that I'm very fortunate, I'm very grateful for zoos. I wouldn't be where I am without them. But as a result of that passion, it then comes to wanting to give back and be, I would say, critical in a constructive way, not critical in the sense that, all right, here's a load of fuel against zoos and good zoos and ex situ conservation organisations. But yeah, to be constructively critical, and I'm not saying that it's going to be the sole factor that drives standards forward, but highlight maybe where there's gaps in what needs improving that we're probably all already aware of. I'm not saying that this is necessarily groundbreaking information that isn't being discussed within the industry either.
No, I I think we're good professionals, but I don't think we're the first men on the moon.
No, certainly not.
But I think the difference is, zoos can often just knock out the same excuses and justifications for the way they do some things, the education and all this kind of stuff, and it's very warranted and very needed. But using probably clouded leopards as a case study, there's an obvious where more can be done, but it's hard. It's a difficult one to take on, and it's probably relied upon, particularly in lots of the mainland European zoos, a real stamp collector's interest from a director, probably a few decades ago, to get into that species. And then now the goals have changed, as we say, but to stay in that species. And look, zoos don't have to go out there and all really care about clouded leopards, but I'm a firm believer that every zoo enclosure, every animal held, every encounter with the public that's offered needs to be justifiable on conservation terms to an extent. And yeah, we do need to start highlighting some of our own species. And the thing you said about red panda, I'm very, very lucky that I now get to work with koalas. And I would argue that koalas are top 5 most famous animals in the world. If you ask a kid anywhere in the world to name a few animals, koala probably will come out, or they'll recognize it. And they're in so much trouble constantly. Australia has the fastest mammal extinction rate of any country in the world, and should do better. We have all the science, all the resources, all the knowledge, and we continue to make poor decisions for our wildlife. And the koalas also have what we were talking about earlier, is the cute factor. They're pretty popular and everyone loves them. I mean, I remember seeing one for the first time and thinking, this is as cool as it gets. And I see them every day now and I still think it's pretty cool. And I had same with the red panda, same with the sloth, same with lots of these animals that we define as cute or popular, and probably, unfortunately, just assume that they're doing well because they're in lots of zoos. Look at the example of callitrichid species, so small primate species like a cotton-top tamarin or a golden lion tamarin. Any primate collection certainly in Europe or in North America worth being deemed a good primate collection is going to have a golden lion tamarin. But this is a species that almost went. What was the numbers? Like low hundreds left.
Yeah.
But the irony there is that they were only saved thanks to intervention by ex situ zoological facilities. But sometimes I think we do these animals a disservice. And using koalas as an example, I think a lot of kids and a lot of adults from all over the world, they come to the zoo and they want to hear a koala talk, and we deliver a koala talk. And we say to them all the cool things and all the cute things, and also that no koala talk is complete without a bit of sad, and talking about the reality of what they're facing. And the justification for that is I'm not doing the guests, or much more importantly, the animal, a service without telling them the truth. I really, really loved your episode with Douglas Richardson, who's probably one of my zoo heroes, and him talking about not doing stuff until it's too late. And probably if you look at an overall picture of how many clouded leopards are in zoos, we have enough breeding experience, but it's very isolated at certain zoos that have bred well. And we need to make sure that we're probably getting that out and about, because they are clearly going to be one of the species, as Doug was referring to in his episode, that we know is going to need more and more help as we move forward.
Yeah, and public are very switched on nowadays. They're so clued up that it almost makes it easier for us to have those meaningful conversations.
Yeah, I think to refer back to it again, as Doug said, his experience with dealing with the public is they like to be told the truth and they can deal with that. And I think that's how we should treat our guests. If me and you stand and do a talk, a Clouded Leopard talk at the zoo, and just talk about their cool patterns and how cool their big teeth are, and this one's name is one, to reference one I worked with, Taiwada, and isn't he great, and look at him getting his food and have a great day in the coffee shops that way. We probably leave that guest with a pretty good experience, but we don't make a difference and we don't give them a message. And for me, it kind of comes back to the example I kind of try and use when talking about this is, and you're probably going to nod along, you go to a zoo and you see an elephant talk, and they say to you all these wonderful things about the herd and the matriarchal society and all this kind of lovely stuff. And then at the end they say, oh, and if you want to help elephants, don't buy ivory products. And everyone leaves the zoo thinking, my God, I am such a conservationist because I'm not going to buy ivory products. And, I think we're past that.
Yeah.
I think we're past the point where we need to bubble wrap our messages and give people a false illusion. It's hard sometimes to not make people feel bad about some of their choices, but we can frame them. The important thing is to not avoid those kind of messages in zoos, whether that's through a talk, through some signage, through a video you're going to post online. Let's tackle them head on, because time is running out, and fighting the good fight is one thing in terms of doing what we've been doing for the last probably 45 years in zoos, but we've come a long way. And certainly knowing your background, Johnny, and some of the things that you've been influenced by, probably most of the reference books that me and you are really strongly influenced by are now between 50 and 30 years out of date.
Yeah.
That golden age of writing about zoos seems to have gone, but they're still relevant, and that's wonderful. But it's also a bit scary that we're not moving as quickly as I think we should.
Yeah, I think the key element to any progress is urgency, and not urgency urgency in the pace that you're moving along, but urgency in, like you said earlier, so important, the language that we are using. And I suppose then in terms of, we've highlighted what zoos can do more of. This would be a call to action for more visitors to approach zookeepers. And I'm sure there's probably no number of zookeepers that are going to hate me for saying that, because they've got things to be doing. Approach, have those conversations, create those platforms for those conversations to be had.
I couldn't agree more. I think no matter what zoo you're working in, speaking from the zookeeper's point of view, there is no more meaningful conservation work than you can do than having a chat with a visitor. Some days, some days people are doing some pretty cool work, but changing behaviours, or even just providing the information and the knowledge, we know that our visitors are going to learn a lot more from having a conversation with us than by reading a sign or by going to a talk, which is a bit more general. I have approached zookeepers both before and after becoming one and had those conversations. I think the UK does it pretty poorly as a very blanket statement. Certainly since moving to Australia, zookeepers are very much more expected to interact with our guests. I went back to the UK last year, and I'm not going to name it because that would be unprofessional, but went to a very small indoor facility on my travels, actually just outside the UK. Me and a friend were the only two people in there. There was plenty of staff, and we spent a good amount of time in there because I was kind of talking him through some bits and bobs, and not once were we approached to have a chat or engaged. And could have been the difference between somebody changing some huge patterns in their life and not. Yes, you don't always have the time for it, as you say. Some zookeepers may listen to this and curse you out for encouraging it, but actually, I'm going to give the other side of that coin. I think if you're a zookeeper and you're not engaging with your visitors, you really need to reassess how effective you are in your role. Doug said on his episode with you, when I see a zookeeper walking through the zoo on their phone, I say you're not doing your job because you're not looking at animal behaviours. My phone usage since listening to that has cut down ridiculously whilst I'm in the zoo, because I want to be good at what I'm doing. And someone I look up to is telling me that isn't how to do it. So I'm changing a behaviour where I can. And yeah, I think if you're a zookeeper and you're not engaging, then why not? Often they're some of the best parts of your day, as probably we both know. And it's easy to forget that is meaningful conservation work. Yeah,
definitely. And yeah, hopefully it wouldn't. Yeah, we're not pointing the finger. We're not, coming after anyone's routine. But yeah, it's a group effort, and it's just kind of having nothing's going to change if you don't have those conversations.
Yeah, nothing changes if nothing changes. And if you zookeep in the same way that you were taught when you started, then you might be looking after the animals pretty well, but if you're standing still in this industry, you're left behind, I think. And yeah, I agree with you. We're not pointing fingers or trying to critique anyone. I'm talking to myself mainly. I want to be better. And, I think that the wonderful thing about this industry and the wonderful thing about zoos is, as much as we say, the literature maybe that we read is a bit outdated now, and have we done enough? Of course, zoos have moved on exponentially, and zookeepers have changed and evolve and inspire me every day to get better because of how sort of thirsty we are for more. And every non-animal person in a zoo always comments on how they've never met people like zookeepers because they're so driven to do that. And I think it's a bit of a snowball, it's, if you start having some deeper conversations with public, start playing around with some messages you can get through, and it will build like a snowball. But if you do your same public talk about the elephants and not buying ivory that you were doing 5 years ago, and then you leave that area and head off, you're just missing a chance to be better. You're probably still pretty good, but if you can be great versus pretty good, then it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, perfect point there. And so just before we move on to your origin story there, Dan, and looking into your career and your background, is there any in situ programs out there for clouded leopards that even zoos are already supporting or could provide more support for?
Yeah, as I say, International Clouded Leopard Day that we set up, Lauren Amos from Howlett's and myself, we're just there to get people talking. So what we're looking for is, social media posts and special events and stalls and, things like that. And that has happened to such an extreme that we can't believe it, for a pair of keepers sitting in a sort of shed in a zoo in the southeast of England to have Cincinnati Zoo post our day, or National Geographic on Instagram post about it. It's pretty special. So that's cool, and that's got people talking and hopefully kicked a few goals from that sense. But yeah, the two main ones really that are doing specific work are the Clouded Leopard Working Group and Project Neofelis. both widely available websites, social media pages, and can I'd really point everyone in the direction of even just giving them a little follow online to keep up to date with some of the work they're doing. As you can imagine, a lot of the stuff is as simple as camera traps and staff hours and vehicles to get access to areas. So I'd really, really encourage partnerships between ex situ facilities and them as an in situ group. I am starting to see a great trend in zoos, which is a desire to work with areas and with species that they don't necessarily house. I think that's a big shift. For example, a lot of zoos in the UK, a criticism I would have of them is that we don't champion British species enough. But I'm starting to see a slight shift even into supporting some local charities or having nature walks installed as part of what we're doing. I think the Wild Place Project, Bristol Zoo sort of move is a good example of getting people excited about what the UK maybe once was from a ecological and wildlife perspective with the bare wood. But yeah, I don't think you have to have a clouded leopard on display to start some of these partnerships.
Yeah, definitely not. You can see all of these enclosures now. Like I said, they do have signage pointing towards them, or how certain relationships between species exist, even if you aren't exhibiting that ideal species. Yeah, it kind of marries a point that you said earlier, and hopefully we will continue to see that drive.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I think it's a no-brainer, and I think the more that kind of the next generation comes through in zookeeping who really have the bit between their teeth and are seeing a world changing around them, but also seeing how they can influence it. I really do believe that some of these kind of illogical reasons to not have these partnerships will soon be torn to shreds by a generation that can solve problems and rise up pretty well.
Dan, that's a great way to finish up on what you think or what you would like to see, not only from yourself going forward, like you say, you kind of your own biggest critic, and you're constantly reassessing your performance, and what you'd like to see from zoos going forward, but also the keepers within them. It's now time for your origin story. We'd love to know how you got to where you are today. So please, tell us about your background.
Yeah, so I was really lucky to start my career working at my local zoo, but I didn't actually start until I was 25, which felt old at the time. It doesn't feel as old now, but life went in a different direction for me, and I went to uni and studied different things. And I always credit him wherever I can, even though it's he's the most famous zookeeper ever. But at 23, I visited Australia Zoo as a backpacker, and went to the Crocodile where Steve Irwin used to do his presentations, and walked around the zoo. You'd seen on TV so many times as a kid, and kind of decided there and then almost to try and get into it, and was lucky enough to become a carnivore keeper at Howlett's after about a year of volunteering and studying the DIMSA. And was there for 5 years overall, and left just before COVID to take a bit of a chance and move to Australia. I kind of always wanted to work with Australian species. My big bucket list species was always a Tasmanian devil, as well as saltwater crocodiles, more just because I thought Steve Irwin was cool than anything. But Tassie devils for me was pretty cool. I'd worked with honey badgers in the UK. I was very lucky to work with them, and kind of got an affinity for small, angry, bitey things. And was lucky. I came over on a backpacker visa, and then got a job at Halls Gap Zoo, which is a small regional facility about 3 hours outside of Melbourne, in Victoria, and was there for a year during COVID, and had an amazing experience working with all sorts of stuff, and then kind of got the dream call up and managed to get a sort of a short-term contract at Melbourne Zoo in the reptile or the ectotherm department, so mainly reptiles, but did some invert work as well. And once that finished up, and kind of was looking for sponsorship in Australia to kind of try and stay longer, managed to get employment with Capta. So I've been working in far north Queensland, which is an amazing place. Probably the sort of Australia you imagine when I was sitting in the UK, sort of dreaming of coming over. It's hot and humid, and there's crocs in the river, and cassowaries wild, and snakes and lizards all year round. And we're in the middle of winter now, and the coldest it's been is probably about 13 degrees, and that's kind of jumpers and hats kind of weather out here, because it's such a difference. But yeah, I've kind of had a really varied experience working with some cool conservation programs, working with lots and lots of species after spending 5 years working with, I think, about 17 different species. It'll be well over 100 now because of the variety, and I've kind of enjoyed every element of that. And I'm a real zookeeper, in the sense of that's what I want to be. I'm not somebody harboring ambitions to go and work in the field, or looking to have a career change. I want to be doing this until my knees go, and probably even after that, struggling on like we see some of our older colleagues do. But yeah, I'm the biggest supporter, but also the biggest critic of zoos, and firmly want to be part of the change for good.
Yeah, I think our listeners, and certainly, just sitting here having this conversation with you, it's infectious, and it's easy to pick up your enthusiasm and your dedication. So yeah, I think there's no worries about that coming across at all. You mentioned about how Howlett's was your local zoo growing up, so kind of, I'm guessing that was your first experience with the zoo. But yeah, just walk us through that first experience with visiting a zoo.
Yeah, it would have almost certainly been at Howlett's. I feel like I can remember it, but I also went there a lot as a teenager and as a young adult, and then obviously worked there. And so my memories have probably blurred. But yeah, Howlett's is, a pretty well-known zoo in the UK, pretty rich history. And, things like gorillas and tigers are probably two of the most iconic species, speaking broadly, that Howlett's will be known for. So I've got big memories of the smell of the gorilla enclosure and seeing tigers up close. But I do have real strong memories of being taken to London Zoo as a kid. I was probably 6 or 7, and driving through the middle of London and going to London Zoo and seeing things that I'm glad aren't still exhibited at London Zoo, because the space is probably a bit small. But, seeing some of those species up close and going into that reptile house, and there's not a kid around, is there, that doesn't find that just to be the most fascinating thing. And I think the key, and I know this is very well covered, but the key is the smell and the sound. There's an argument that kids love dinosaurs and they don't exist, so why would they need to go to a zoo? But the difference is that the animals that live in a zoo do exist, and we've probably all had that experience of seeing something like an elephant up close. But yeah, I think the smell of a gorilla enclosure that probably hasn't been cleaned any time recently is one of my earlier memories.
And sticking with first experiences, then, what was your first experience with the Clouded Leopards?
Yeah, so I got back from this backpacking trip where I was super motivated and inspired to become a zookeeper, with no idea of how to get into it. I'd studied criminology at uni, and I kind of wanted to work in, like offender rehabilitation or the police force of some description. I worked in a young offenders institution before going traveling. So I kind of had an idea of what maybe I wanted to do, and then completely switched up because, I kind of realized that why not do the thing you wanted to do when you were a kid? That's more fun than the other. And so I got volunteering with the education department and kind of nowhere near the animals, but going along to talks and sitting in the education centre and running crosswords and colouring in and stuff. And then there was an opportunity to volunteer with the carnivore department. So I managed to move some things around with my job and get involved with that. And yeah, I actually remember on the first day of volunteering, they had to sadly euthanize a clouded leopard. And Howlett's has its flaws, but it has huge pros, especially for someone like me as volunteering. I was really keen. I wasn't hidden from that. They treated me as an adult, and I didn't step on anyone's toes by being there, but I kind of just helped out and opened a few gates for people, and then the team was running behind, so I did a bit of work in the clouded leopard enclosures, and yeah, kind of went from there. I used to volunteer with a guy called Mark, who was the stud book keeper for clouded leopards at the time, and he taught me a lot about the species and how to act around them. And we were able to go in the enclosures with them, and it's pretty hard to not get captivated by a clouded leopard, even just by looking at a picture of one. So to kind of be stood in an enclosure looking up and one's kind of side eye and you're looking down but sort of snoozing, pretty special. I love working with all different species, but I do miss those guys and a lot of the cats. But I was just lucky, man. My local zoo was a huge breeder of clouded leopards, and I think when I first started volunteering, we had about 26 individuals, which is just a gargantuan number when I stop and think about it. Yeah, and honestly, probably like that first year of zookeeping, when you don't really know what goes on apart from outside your zoo. You're just so invested in learning everyone's names and all that kind of stuff, and working hard. And I just couldn't believe it the first day that money was deposited in my bank account for working in a zoo. I couldn't fathom that was a reality. It wasn't a lot of money, as we know, but it was enough to pay the rent. And I thought, this is amazing. I'd spent my life paying to go to zoos, and now the reverse was happening. But yeah, to have those experiences and come into it, and then realizing that actually we were breeding every year and we had a large number and not many zoos did. And talking to Mark and reading the stud book, I started to realize that clouded leopards weren't just a real treat for us, and not everyone had this experience.
Yeah, definitely. Like we've discussed, certainly quite a niche species in zoos, which is an element for change. But when you've kind of switched from volunteer to paid keeper now, what first surprised you when you started in zookeeping?
I mean, there was probably a few things. The fun one, I guess, is we did a lot of butchery, and that was quite surprising initially. It became second nature, but we were probably one of the last sort of large facilities that was butchering all of our food, mainly horse, but through to lots of things. And yeah, I turned vegetarian not long before that, and kind of walked in there, probably not expecting that was going to be part of the role, but it never bothered me, apart from having stinking clothes. But it was pretty full on. It took up a lot of our job, and I think that kind of surprised me. But again, that was probably quite a specific concern, certainly within the UK, as far as I can tell, for larger facilities. But out in Australia, I've encountered it a bit more. But honestly, the other thing was that it's really hard to become a zookeeper, and I felt like, and I still feel like, zookeepers work really hard to get where they are, and then kind of are happy with that. And maybe that's just a personality thing, but I kind of thought I'd walk into an organization full of people who were all, trying to do their bit to fight climate change and trying to get better as a keeper every day and as a citizen of the earth. And, actually people are people, and that's okay. But yeah, it surprised me that of course you're going to get more environmentalists, conservationists, left-wing, leaning individuals who, are trying to get better as a rule, but it's not as dominant as probably people from the outside would think. But I don't know if you've had any similar experiences like that or thoughts like that.
I think my experience, like, there are, those who come in early, stay late, and there are those that come, excuse me, and kind of just do the 8 till 6. I'm not saying they do the bare minimum, but yeah, I, over time, I think I initially thought the same as you. I was like, why aren't you necessarily coming in early and staying late? But then actually, I also then I was like, no, but that's okay. Like, if that's what they want to get out of it, and kind of it didn't affect me as much as I thought it was going to.
Yeah, I kind of always say that I'm really torn between thinking you can be a pretty good zookeeper between 9 and 5, but you become a great zookeeper between 5 and 9. And, it's what you do outside of it that's more important. But I'm also torn between being very pro-union and thinking you should be paid for everything you do and all those kind of things. But yeah, I think just even outside of time, like I try and go home on time. It's a tough industry to do that in, but
yeah.
It's just even that drive, like I said with the talks, if you're doing a public talk, you're not watching a few TED Talks on how to present or, changing your facts up. But as I said, for some people that's okay. And it is okay. It's probably just a personality trait more than anything.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, like I say, what they are doing in the time that they are here is great work. So yeah, not batting an eyelid at that bit. So you mentioned that kind of in your time, Howlett's, have had a vast amount of clouded leopards. Would you say there's one individual clouded leopard that you'd consider your sidekick, that you gained a particular attachment to?
The question. There's so many, like the real difference with them was personality wise, some of them were pretty friendly, for want of a better word. Some of them, less so, but there's pros to that. But I guess kind of the obvious one for me would have been is a cat called Matsy. She was born in the States and came over, and unfortunately as a youngster she lost one of her front legs, and so it was a 3-legged clouded leopard who had, it was an amazing mum, kind of bred every year. We kept Dad in with her because she was pretty good at fighting him off, even though he's double her size, and she was missing a leg. And, she was always pretty kind of forgiving. And I don't want that to sound negative in a zoo sense, but we do have to play God at times, and we do have to do things which animals can perceive as negative, and we can lose relationships or hinder relationships as a result of that. But you could kind of, Matsy could kind of have an injection given to her which she didn't enjoy, and then she'll come over and give you a bit of a chuff and squeak and see if you maybe have a treat for her or something. And she's done a good amount for the ex-situ breeding programs. So I think it would have to be her as a clouded leopard. Yeah.
Awesome. And yeah, it's certainly, when you see it, not that it's a common thing, but when you do see, for example, an individual that has one less leg, for example, and the fact that they are still able to go about their routine in the same way, having adapted, it does add a lot to their character.
Yeah, she'd been given like real flat, like instead of being given like perching and branches that are, rounded and naturalistic, she had a lot of kind of flatter stuff in her enclosure, like planks, which was completely warranted because, that locomotion lacked. But we moved her into a new enclosure and just kind of perched it the same way we would any, because she was kind of, she didn't need that accommodation. She was fine at getting around.
You mentioned earlier that kind of obviously your time with Mark when you first started out, and Graham Law previous to that, as influences and mentors in your career. But have there been any hurdles that you've had to overcome conversely to that?
Yeah, influences and mentors. There's, as everyone has, there's too many to name, and there's the ones you've never met. The Steve Irwins and the David Hancocks and John Coes, and there's the ones that you work with directly. And I think I've been extremely lucky to work with some unbelievable people, way too many to name, and continue to work with them now. And but in terms of hurdles, I was working for a zoo until last year that unfortunately closed. So I'm hoping, and I'm touching wood, that the biggest hurdle I will ever face in my career is having to close a zoo and, distribute animals around the country and look after staff and, hold on to morale and look after myself. Easily the hardest professional thing I've ever had to do. And hopefully the hardest professional thing I'll ever have to do. So I worked at Cairns Zoo and Wildlife Dome, which is a small facility in Cairns City in North Queensland, Australia. And we were given about 3 months' notice to leave our premises against our will. So that was an extremely difficult time, and something I hope that none of your listeners have to do.
Yeah, I certainly think there'd be a lot of people empathizing there and understanding that would be an incredibly difficult situation to be in. So what advice would you give to someone looking to pursue a career in conservation?
Do it. I think there's a pathway laid out for everyone to get involved. There's a place for everyone in conservation. There's different places for different people. Not everyone maybe is as well suited to be a zookeeper. Although I do think that if you're not quite sure and you want to get into something, then some kind of animal care like zookeeping is a good starting point. I argue that every conservationist worth their salt has worked with zoos in some way or another. And it teaches you a lot of good skills, but honestly, just do it. And if somebody like me can get into it, then you can too. I was a pretty lazy, kind of typical bloke, didn't really care too much about what they were doing at work, and suddenly found this thing, and it felt like seeing in color for the first time when I discovered this industry. And it breaks my heart that people don't find that for themselves. And if you're sitting there thinking, I'd love to do something like that, there is very little to no excuse to not. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It definitely doesn't mean that it's going to be kind to you. But if you don't do it, I just couldn't imagine not doing it, and living with that, thinking, oh, I wish I would have done that. It's a scary thought, and it's not being an astronaut. It's not impossible. You can do it. You can probably surprise yourself. I've worked with plenty of people that have probably spent most of their life wishing they did it, but then did it. A colleague of mine now, Steve, got into it a bit later, but he's in it now. So who cares? The biggest regret would have been not doing it at all,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that resonates or would resonate with a lot of people across a variety of different industries and actions. So on your achievements then throughout your career, what are some of the proudest achievements that you've had to date?
Yeah, so to peek behind the curtain, I was aware that this question would potentially come up, probably for a week or so now, and I still don't have an answer for you. I'm very, very, very tough on myself, and as we all are, probably suffer with a bit of imposter syndrome and think I could do more. So I find it hard to pick a singular event and say, I'm pleased with that or whatever. I sort of think it's still yet to come, but I also wonder if it will come. And I don't think that's a negative thing at all, because I get to have wonderful experiences every day with amazing people. But thinking on the fly, the proudest achievement probably would be the team from Cairns Zoo and Wildlife Dome that we had, and I was just a part of that team. But I was just very proud of them and the way in which they ran that small facility that definitely overachieved considering its size, and the things that they did, and then the things that they've gone on to do, and the people that they are. I think, I'm most proud of them and what they continue to do. And my ethos with, being kind of in a team leader role now is that when I train somebody, I want them to be better than me, and on the proviso that then when they train someone, they'd have that same ethos. So within a couple of years, there's a keeper coming through that's going to be twice the keeper that I am. And in a few more years than that, there's one coming through that's going to be 4 times better than me. So I've got a lot of catching up to do, fast forward 10 years to try and keep up. But how good is the benefit to the animals if we can do that? And I'm definitely seeing amazing things coming from a lot of those guys that are out there, doing good things. But I'm just super proud of them, to be honest.
Yeah, no, it's that age-old saying, isn't it, that conservation is 100% about the animals, but it is also about the people in it.
Yeah, the more you work in it, the more you work with people. But kind of coming back to your point about talking to zookeepers a bit more, that's a perfect analogy for what we need to be doing more of. If you're the best zookeeper in the world and your husbandry is unbelievable, and maybe you're even contributing to conservation programs for rewilding or something crazy, but you're not talking to the guests, you're missing such a key part of it, because people are essentially the key to conservation, right? The animals are going to do their thing if we allow them to. I love looking back at old pictures of zoos, like London Zoo in the 1900s. And the reason I love it is because the animal looks the same. Everything else around it's changed. And that's probably a good example of what you're saying there. It's up to us to change, not them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In most cases, apart from the odd, unique case where perhaps a species has gone extinct and human encroachment or human intervention had very little to do with it, we absolutely wouldn't be in this position we are today if it wasn't for humans. So it makes absolute sense that humans are the ones that need to change, and it's quite a poignant point there with kind of the then and nows of London Zoo. I could see why you'd get quite great satisfaction out of that. We absolutely made this mess. We must be the ones to get ourselves out of it. So moving forward then, and kind of looking 10 years down the line when maybe your knees are starting to give out, is there anything else that you'd like to achieve in your career?
I kind of have a goal. Like, I'd love to be a curator of a large zoo. It is kind of my end goal, I guess, but I don't know. I kind of want to do as much different stuff as I can. If you'd have said to me 10 years ago, I'd have done these things. 10 years ago, I was about 1 month into kind of volunteering on an education department at my local zoo. Probably the peak of my career at that point would have been to work at that zoo. So to be in living and working in a different continent now, it's pretty crazy. So to be honest, I want to do as much different stuff as possible. I'd like to continue to move around a little bit and, work in different facilities and hopefully different countries as well. For me, I guess variety will be the key thing, until I maybe find somewhere that does make me want to kind of stick in one place for a while. But yeah, just to do as much as I can and have as many different experiences.
Yeah, that's very, very respectable, I think. So, what then, about the industry as a whole, what do you think is maybe misunderstood about modern zoos and ex situ conservation?
I think the key thing is that people just think that we still operate in the way that we used to, and that just isn't true. We don't just operate for the sole purpose of entertainment or to just look at animals. By virtue of the fact that we sell tickets and you can see animals, that those things exist to some degree, but they are far from the sole purpose. I think most people have an appreciation that the staff care, but I don't know if they've truly realised the effort and sacrifice and kind of lifestyle, I guess, of someone in conservation. And zoos is relatively difficult, but it's a privileged position to be in. But real conservationists on the ground, in situ in areas that are suffering from climate change induced, weather events and stuff. That kind of stuff is pretty crazy. But yeah, certainly from a zoo and ex situ conservation process, I think there possibly could be more of an appreciation that we follow science and we adapt and change our practices probably as frequently as you can as an industry. Maybe the aviation industry might be slightly ahead of us because they legally have to adapt and change to issues, but we do really try and learn from those mistakes and get better. And probably if I was to go out on a limb, that the biggest misunderstanding is that animals would be a lot worse off without us than with us. A lot of people who maybe don't appreciate zoos and what they do, I respect that, but we have to have a role. And as somebody or a pair of people in this situation who are critics of the industry that we are in, we want to be part of that role for the good, as we said.
Yeah, and again, I think until it's almost in a non-aggressive way forced down the throat of people. That the biodiversity crisis is the single biggest crisis on the planet at the moment, and that might be a political statement. It might not appear that way to everyone on the surface, but when you strip it back, the amount of things that come down to the biodiversity crisis at its core, you absolutely need to respect that. You might not like zoos, but you need to respect that they are a mainstay and a pivotal part of the future of the planet.
Yeah, I think that's very neatly summarised. As it is just a case. You may not like them, and that's okay. There's lots of things I don't like, but I don't try and eradicate them.
Yeah, definitely. So if there was one thing alone that you could improve about the industry, what would it be?
I think one thing to improve about the industry would probably be a level playing field. I think there are lots of zoos with strong financial backing, particularly government-run organisations or donor-funded organisations, and that's amazing. And how we push forward with modern zoo, exhibition and experience, is really driven by a lot of those heavier resourced zoos. But I'd like to see a more even spread. There are zoos that simply cannot exhibit animals in certain ways. So if we look at the tunnel systems, the Zoo 360 system at Philadelphia Zoo, which John Coe, designed and has been installed and is kind of mimicked in lots of places. When you see a small zoo that can't afford to make that look aesthetically pleasing, having a tunnel with an animal running across the public, I wish they'd never bothered. I'd like to see, more appreciation for the joy in doing something simple but doing it very well.
Yeah.
If you run a zoo, you can probably afford to do that. Simple enclosures, simple water features in a bird aviary, or simple tanks put together for a reptile with appropriate lighting, appropriate furnishing. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You just need to be able to do things well, and maybe that requires a bit of a level playing field of expectation and resources.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. So then going forward, what gives you motivation for the future of zoos?
Look, it's one I've struggled with sometimes, because, you know, I have wondered whether zoos are a finite thing. They've been around for several thousands of years. Ancient Egypt is a good example of obvious zoos, and Babylon as well. But I know that they will continue to be here because of the biodiversity crisis that you mentioned. For me, the motivation is, therefore, now I understand that is very easy, and that is doing my best for the animals and doing better than I was doing for them yesterday. And aiming for that continuous improvement, because fundamentally, if I'm a better zookeeper, then an animal's life is probably slightly better. And sometimes being a better zookeeper does mean being better at talking to people, or being better at crafting an email, to a donor, or having better animal records. Sometimes it isn't the literal work we do in the enclosure, it's some of that bigger picture work. And if I can be really good at all of those different things, if I can be really good at rostering the team or approving the leave requests, I am convinced that an animal's life will be better as a result of my effectiveness in those things. So I kind of see zookeeping as a craft, a bit like a trade. And I think by doing the things properly and not cutting corners, and really, really investing in going about things in the right way, an animal's life will be better. And that is the easiest motivation in the world. Money and free pizza at work and a nice parking space, it's kind of, motivating for a couple of days. But if you go in knowing you're providing something good for an animal, and then have what I referred to earlier of making sure the person that you've trained on that enclosure is going to be even better than you, then it's hard to not be motivated rather than hard to find the motivation.
Yeah, very poignant answer there. So Dan, what a great origin story you've had. And to close out the conversation today, we're gonna have some quick fire questions to finish up on. Are you ready?
I'm ready. I'll try and be as quick as I can.
Are there any dream species that you'd love to work with or see in the wild?
Yeah, I've been lucky to see and work with quite a few cool species in the wild. I'd love to see tigers in the wild. But the three that come to mind on my list is the two that have been on there forever are jaguar and spotted hyena. Either to work with or see in the wild. I've done neither, and just got back from a trip to the States and went to a few cool zoos. And for me, the hellbender salamander species is just one of the coolest things in the world. And seeing them in a zoo setting, I saw them at Cincinnati Zoo in Kentucky, in Kentucky at Newport Aquarium. Even just seeing them in that setting just made me feel like a kid seeing an elephant in the zoo for the first time. So yeah, I'd love to do a bit of work with them for sure.
Awesome. And yeah, are there any places that you would love to visit as well then?
I think Sumatra would be the place I'd love to go. It's pretty achievable. Just getting around to it. But yeah, I'd love to go to Sumatra. I'm pretty confident I won't see a tiger there because that'd be pretty rare. But just to be amongst it and the wildlife, and what an amazing kind of rich place that is. And maybe I might catch a glimpse of a pug mark or a fecal.
Yeah. I suppose it would still feel wild enough that you respect that space and you understand what is around you, even if you're not seeing it.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, if you could be an animal, what would you be and why?
Sloth every time. It just looks great. You know, you've got an ecosystem of little bugs living on you. You're pretty chilled. You've got a really healthy diet. You don't rush anything. Yeah, if reincarnation's a thing, then that's my choice.
Yeah, sounds idyllic for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, you've mentioned, you've travelled a lot, you've been to a few zoos, as people who enjoy zoos do, especially those who work with them. Have you got a favourite zoo that you have visited? And is there a dream zoo that you would yet to visit?
Yeah, I've been to a few. I've ticked off a lot of my bucket list. And yeah, pretty much every trip I take, I try and at least sneak a zoo in there, if not, make the trip around visiting zoos. It's such a hard question. It's a bit like films. There's a difference between the best film you've ever seen and your favorite film.
Yeah.
I think my favorite zoo I visited is London. The history of the place, the stuff that's happened there, the stuff that continues to happen there, the setting, the architecture. I just find it captivating every time I go, and obviously personal memories of going as a boy as well. In terms of a zoo I'd like to visit, I'm pretty fascinated by the big North American facilities. I've been lucky to go to a few of them. I went to Cincinnati recently, which was probably at the top of my list, so I managed to tick that off. I got a trip to Taronga Zoo lined up, which I'm looking forward to. For your UK listeners, Ramesh Ranganathan's coming to Australia, so I'm going to go to Sydney and see him and tie that in with a zoo. But I'd like to explore Europe a bit more, to be honest with you, and probably Scandinavia. So, yeah, I'd be really interested to go to Copenhagen Zoo or go into Europe and go to some of the German zoos a bit more, maybe Leipzig or somewhere like that. I hear good things, or Wrocław in Poland. Yeah, I'd love to do a bit more in Europe, because it's funny, because when I lived there, I was trying to get over to places further away, and now I'm trying to go back to visit zoos there.
Yeah, definitely a lot of European zoos to take in. There's just so many.
So many, yeah, and then everyone you speak to's got a different favourite, and yeah, there's common themes, but yeah, Parc du Feline would be a cool experience, but
yeah,
I try and go to as many as I can, so eventually I'm sure I'll get there.
Yeah, I'm sure you will too. So after a day of fighting extinction, how do you relax? How do you unwind, especially being a Brit in Australia?
Yeah, I guess the job is also the lifestyle, and I love reading and that kind of stuff. I think, like most zookeepers, I'm actually pretty boring outside of having a cool job, just simple things. But yeah, living in Australia has given me the opportunity to really kind of explore a little bit more, and living in such a beautiful place as well, where winter isn't really a thing. You're able to kind of go out and just be in the wild and look for animals is a really amazing thing. It's feasible for me to walk from my flat, and there's crocodile habitat, there's snakes. I had a frog on the balcony not long ago, which is pretty cool. And not far, in the car, you can see all sorts of lizards and cassowary and crazy Australian species. So I'd say that, but truthfully, yeah, I'm pretty dull, I guess. just doing real life stuff in amongst the cool job, and reading about the job, and looking on Facebook groups about zookeeping, and writing things and doing research. I'm pretty invested in this career, if you can't tell already.
No, we can definitely tell, and yeah, we all know that zookeepers are modern day superheroes. So Dan, if you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Do you remember Bernard's Watch, the TV show?
I don't. I can't say that I do.
You're a bit younger than me. So there was this TV show when I was a kid, and he had a stopwatch and he could pause time. And I've never found another thing that I would want more than that. I mean, talking to animals would be pretty great. But there is a philosophical theory that if a lion could speak English, you would never be able to have a conversation with them because your reference points would be too different. So I'm going to go with that and pretend I know anything about philosophy. Yeah, I'd have to watch to pause time. You could kind of get away with a lot of stuff. You know, you could, this kid in this TV show used to use it to, you know, I guess like cheat on exams at school, and, you know, he'd run up and see what the answers were and then go back because he could still move around. So, yeah, I'd like to be able to pause time. I don't think I want that for any greater good. I think it would be a massive convenience saver for me. But also you could get more out of your day because you could probably pause time, go to bed, wake up, and then keep going. So that would be handy.
Yeah, it absolutely sounds very convenient, to be fair. So yeah, I get it. And similarly, then, what would your superhero name be?
I've never ventured further away than Spider Dan, because all you got to do is change one letter. Spiders are cool. Spider-Man is a pretty cool superhero. I as a kid, I was kind of gravitated towards him, and I always say that as a kid, my superhero. You know, when lots of kids were watching that kind of stuff, I was watching Steve Irwin and thinking that it probably wasn't real. He was just crazy, and yeah, I can't fathom that I'm in the same industry as him, and I'm actually work in the same country as him, and have met heaps of people that that worked with him, and I'm actually I do a bit of spokesperson stuff for Crop Queensland, and his father Bob Irwin is involved with that process, so it's really, really cool. So he's my real superhero, but if I had to, it would definitely be Spider Dan.
Spider Dan, I like it. It rolls off the tongue.
Mm.
And so then, Spider Dan, how can listeners follow your work and the work of your organisation?
Yeah, so I work for the Capta Group up in North Queensland, but the easiest way to follow them would be to follow the park Rainforestation. So you can look that up on Instagram, just at Rainforestation. And yeah, Sophie from social media is a keeper and does social media, posts lots of cool stuff, and there's a few bits of me on there you can scroll past. But for me, I don't yet. I've toyed with the idea a lot. I don't yet have kind of a professional specific kind of social media page. But yeah, my Instagram is just at Dan Kemp, and I do post some zoo stuff on there and some personal stuff. So, but I'm known to, yeah, I guess, post a few kind of behind the scenes pictures of what we get up to on a daily basis.
Awesome. Well, if you ever do have a professional page, we've literally just come up with your handle in your superhero name there.
Thanks for doing the work for me, mate.
Yeah. Dan, do you just have any last messages for our listeners?
Yeah, I think it's very easy to have a desire to kind of want to help wildlife, or even be in a job where you do help wildlife, or a volunteering position, or send a charitable donation to help wildlife. But I think that every single person could probably do a lot more by their own definition, whether that is a bit of volunteering or a financial donation. But truthfully, I think the biggest thing that every single person can do with very little excuse is just changing a few habits. Are you buying the most sustainable products? Are you, traveling in the most sustainable way that you can? I think it's very easy to feel helpless when it comes to wildlife conservation. But there is stuff that you can do. And I kind of say to people a lot, if it doesn't work in the end, wasn't it worth giving it a go and fighting the good fight, rather than just kind of going, oh, well, I'm not going to recycle because what's the point? Or I'm not going to, buy that green product or vote for that green policy. Truthfully, I think we can all demand a lot more from mainly businesses and politicians who do have the power, and we can vote with our wallet by buying products that support those initiatives. And we can vote literally by, not voting for people who are actively destroying the environment, or initiatives which are doing that. You've got to, if you want to contribute to that, you've got to put that above some of your own needs sometimes, but also just do it and just step up a little bit. And if collectively we all did a little bit, it would make a lot more impact than if just one person did everything. There's power in numbers, and if we could all do a little bit more and make a few little shifts, like buying recycled paper toilet paper rather than non-recycled, a simple shift like that can actually make a huge difference that we probably don't appreciate.
Yeah, I'm glad you finished up with that point. I was going to add that, it would be, I think it's surprising to people how much the pressure of the masses can do it, like say, as opposed to the one person doing a lot of things perfectly.
Absolutely. It's the cliche of the kind of green environmentalist warrior doing everything, electric cars and, recycling every product they use. It's great, but alone it's pretty ineffective. Whereas, a street full of people doing their best and still living their life and enjoying their limited time on Earth, that's more impactful if they all do pretty well versus one person doing amazingly.
And with that last question, Dan, you've completed the interview, so thank you so much for teaming up with me on the Conservationists Assemble. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen to your incredible knowledge and just positive outlook on clouded leopard conservation, but also modern zoos in general, and your unwavering dedication to ensuring their future. You are a valuable ally in the fight against extinction.
Thank you. It was great to come on, Johnny, and it's great to see what you're doing. And some of the guests you've had on have been amazing. Some really big names. So, I'm really pleased and proud that you asked me to come on and have a chat.
Yeah, it's been great. We'll be sure to keep up to date with all of your work, and we obviously wish you all the best in the remainder of your career.
Thanks, Johnny. Same to you.
Hey there, friends. Sadly, that does bring this episode to an end. I've loved having you on this journey with me. I just want to leave you with one last message. Look, if you're constantly wondering if conservation works, if you don't know exactly how you can get involved and make a difference for the betterment of the planet and the species featured on the podcast each week, and you feel like it's guesswork, you feel like while you so desperately want to help save wildlife and better understand the work of zoos and other conservation organisations, you just don't know where to begin, if you want to find out exactly the answers to all these feelings, then why not make this podcast your conservation headquarters by following, rating and sharing the podcast. Tune in each week and interact with the podcast to receive up-to-date, honest information on all things conservation, but also to take part in the fun elements like sharing your favourite pictures, videos or stories of your animals, or perhaps your experiences at a zoo. And be sure to check out the new feature, Species Summaries. These episodes recaps will summarise our full episodes but shouldn't be listened to in place of them. Don't forget, this podcast is the People's Podcast. If there are any particular conservation topics or species you want more clarity on, this is your platform to see that happen. Thank you so much for listening. You've been amazing as always. Until next time, this is Captain Conservation signing off. Over and out.